We're rolling.
Yep.
All right.
Well, this is going to be fun.
All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of Facebook, or good evening, I should say. Welcome to our weekly series. I say this every single week, but it bears repeating every single week. So if you're new to what we're doing, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. This is a weekly series that we do both of interviews and concerts, all of which are free and open to the public. We stream them live here on Facebook, and then we post them to YouTube. So if you know folks that might want to check them out there, feel free. It's under the Kareem Kandi World Orchestra. Good luck spelling that. All right, today we have as our guest one of the Northwest's favorite pianists and hardest working piano players. He's all over the place. Just off the top of my head here, I know he's doing a lot of projects with Josephine Howell and Elna Jordan and Devon Lewis's limited edition, as well as Cliff Cologne's contraband. And let's see, he played a seminal role in the jam session at Capitol Cider in Seattle, as well as the Owl Thistle. And see, I know I'm forgetting a ton of stuff, and he works with way more people than this, but this is just, like I said, what's coming to mind right now. And also the wonderful Brazilian group, the EntreMundos Quarteto with Adriana Giordano.
Yeah.
So this is Eric Verlinde, and we're so glad you could join us today, Eric. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being anywhere, really.
Exactly. So let's see. I get to see Eric most of the time when not sheltering in place at the Owl and Thistle, which is a very well-known jam session in Seattle that's been around for over 20 years now.
Yeah, since 1997.
Yeah, and for most of the people that go out on the scene in jazz, I would say, probably don't get to make it out because it starts at 10 p.m. at night, which is kind of a cool thing, and I guess a bad thing if you're not into staying up late. But
it kind of weeds out the squares.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, so obviously none of us are playing a lot right now. I mean, we're practicing a lot and writing, doing that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
Prior to sheltering in place, you're working all the time. So how many nights a week were you typically performing?
Pretty much all of them. When we got shut down, I was working 6 nights a week at El Gaucho restaurant in both Seattle locations and the Bellevue location. And prior to getting that gig in 2017, I was pretty much filling up my calendar with steadies. I think if you looked at my 2015 calendar, Sunday night I was working at Sugar Jams and at Sugar Jazz Bistro. Monday night at Capitol Cider. Tuesday night was Owl Thistle, and then just different various things. So I just kind of filled up my schedule with some weekly gigs. That's kind of was a goal of mine, is to get weekly gigs so that you just kind of build up your audience that way. But then there's all with all the different bands that you had mentioned, inevitably somebody would have a gig. So yeah, so I feel very fortunate and blessed to have had a lot of work all these years. I mean, if you looked at my calendar back in 2002, you might see 3 gigs on there and a bunch of students. But I think by about 2008, it was pretty much full time.
Do you still, when you were performing, before the pandemic and performing quite a lot, were you still doing some teaching on the side, like students that you really wanted to teach? Or?
Yeah, exactly. Just the students that I really would like to teach, and I was able to not focus so much on the teaching side of things, even though I've been a teacher since I was 14. Which in high school it was great. My studio had about 20 students, all coming in for half-hour or 45-minute lessons, and for a high school gig when you're 15 years old, that was a lot of fun, I realized, that I could actually make a living doing this.
Boy, were you run! I'm kidding. Well, that's why I want to go back to the beginning. So I like to ask all the artists, kind of what got you started in music? What piqued your interest and got you into playing music and enjoying music to begin with?
Well, I mean, I feel fortunate that my mother was really into culture and the arts, and my dad's a big music fan as well. But gee, my mom was pregnant with me, and she would put on headphones and pipe in classical music and all sorts of songs as I was being made, as I was developing. And so I have a feeling that might have had something to do with my love for music. It's always been a part of me. When I was 2 years old, they took me down to the parade, in Snohomish, and the marching band came walking down, and shoot, I just felt inspired, and I started marching alongside with them down the street, and I mean, so I just have loved music. I think the definitive moment where I was like, you know what, I want to do this. My parents had taken me to go see the Nutcracker Ballet, which is a holiday tradition here in the Northwest, and just hearing all the music by Tchaikovsky and seeing the sets, and it was just amazing, and it was spectacular. And during after the presentation, I went down to the pit to go see, where was all the sound coming from, and I saw all the musicians packing up their instruments, and I go, oh man, this music was made by these instruments. And on the way home from that, I asked my mom and dad if I could play violin, and they talked to my aunt Maggie, who is a piano teacher, and she said, violin's kind of tough instrument for little hands. Maybe get him involved with some piano lessons. He can learn how to read music and whatnot. And so that's what they did. They got me involved with a piano teacher by the name of Pat Reeve, who actually, she passed away this spring. So I was kind of mourning her loss. So I took 10 years of classical piano lessons, and she really kind of started to recognize that I was also kind of into jazz and blues, and so she got me involved with some of those books and stuff like that. And in 7th grade, I auditioned for the 7th grade jazz band.
I need to stop really quick here. I've neglected to ask, and this is my fault. Where did you grow up? Where was home when you were really young?
I grew up in a little town called Snohomish, Washington, and it's a great little place to live. And my dad still lives up there, and I really like it out there. I had to move to Seattle because there wasn't really any jazz gigs up in Snohomish to speak of. And I knew that I had to be in a cultural center to play the kind of music that I wanted to play, and to be around the caliber of musicians that I wanted to be playing with. So.
Well, when you got started, you were young, you're taking piano lessons, started to get interested in like rock and blues and jazz and other forms of music. So you said you auditioned, was this middle school you auditioned to play?
Yeah, actually in 7th grade there was a spot on the piano player on Mike Mines, the trumpet player. Yeah.
What school?
Valley View Junior High School. And so I got in Valley View Junior High School jazz band. There was a couple other piano players. I wasn't the only one. But I remember Mike Mines giving me tapes of Count Basie Orchestra, and just hearing how swing big band music sounds, and he was really into Afro-Cuban music, and he'd have special guests come out and show us Afro-Cuban rhythms, and really that jazz band was so hip. I mean, we were playing all sorts of stuff, and all sorts of different grooves, and it was a really positive experience. And then I went on, to play in jazz band in high school, and in college. And
what high school did you go to?
Snohomish High School. Yeah. Go Panthers.
Well, yeah, Mike is great. I remember when I was in high school doing some big band work up in Seattle. I used to work quite a bit with Tuxedo Junction, and you had all the cavalcade of musicians. And he, from time to time, he'd be playing, and I remember him just being a wonderful musician then. And now his daughter is a tremendous bass player, Kelsey Mines.
I know, she's swinging. Yeah, we've had her at the Owl Thistle several times, and it's great to see talent, the next generation coming up and just like going, wow, all right. You know, it's really neat.
Well, when you were in middle school, high school, and college, did you have any peers that you studied with that continue on with music and are still playing now or around the scene? Or
well, yeah, I got took a couple lessons with Barney McClure, and I definitely took some jazz lessons from Kirk Marcy.
No. What I mean, I'm sorry. What I mean to ask is other students your age that still are playing and went on to still be performing around the area.
Oh, yeah. You know, I mean, sure. I mean, one of my peers was Josh Wolf, who was going to school over at Lake Stevens, and yeah, he was a fantastic piano player who went on to move to New York and have a nice little career out there. And but yeah, growing up in Snohomish, there wasn't a whole lot of players that went on to have careers in music per se as jazz musicians. But I mean, a lot of people, you know, went on and continued to play music. You know, so.
And I'm sorry, where'd you say you went to college?
I went right out of high school. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. Yeah, yeah, and I did the like all of the people that I idolized. I did the 1 year and out program, which, you know, I figured Chick Corea, Pat Metheny, all those guys, they were there for 1 year and then they were gone. So, the lesson that I really learned at Berklee was that, you know. You had to immerse yourself completely in music. There wasn't. You're not going to get by on 20 minutes a day. You know, I was spending like 4 hours a day every day in the practice room, on top of being in ensembles, you know, for another 3 hours a day, and then going to jam sessions after that, and after playing music, you know, 10, 12 hours a day, then you start going, oh, wait, I'm seeing improvement here, you know. And once I learned that lesson, I realized that, oh, all I need to do is completely immerse myself in music, and I could do that anywhere. So I ended up taking a scholarship to go to Mount Hood Community College down in Portland. Okay. Yeah, and I was in Genesis and the Mount Hood Big Band with Chris Brouillet directing and Dave Ardoon directing Genesis. And, you know, I went from doing, when I was over in Boston, I think I did maybe 10 gigs the whole year, to doing like 200 gigs. Yeah. Granted, they weren't paid gigs because
Don't tell people that.
Well, I mean, you're playing for the school, right? And you're going around to different high schools and trying to recruit students to come to. So, I mean, shoot, there was one day that Genesis was on tour, and we did 5 gigs in like 4 different places. So that's load in, set up, sound check, gig, load out, drive to the next school, and do that. And it really, you know, I mean, talk about, that's the real education right there. Yeah. It's like actually doing it, you know. There's talking about doing it, and then there's actually doing it. And so, like, for me, I think I learn better when I'm actually doing it, as opposed to just studying it.
Which is, I think, in this day and age, even prior to COVID, getting tougher and tougher because venues, they're there and then they're gone, then they're there and then they're gone. Right. I mean, that being said, like all the venues that were around when I grew up playing, particularly here in Tacoma, and also several in Seattle, they've come and gone. They're there for a year or two. Maybe some have a 20-year run, like Tulas, and then they're gone.
Yeah,
which is frustrating.
Remember Reds?
I do.
I love Reds. I loved going in there and talking to him because he just had so much history, you know.
Right. Well, that's a rare case. I mean, and occasionally there are rooms like that where you have the guy that's actually running the club is a musician himself and
Right.
kind of knows the ins and outs, not only from the club side of things and the economics of that and how mind-bendingly awful that can be, and then also from the musician side of things. I mean, you can walk that fine line, and it kind of works a little bit better, I think, because they can find a way to make it work for everybody because they understand the gripes on both ends of the spectrum, you know.
Right. I think, we all mourn when a venue gets closed, and definitely having Tulas closed was a really, really tough thing because Mac did so much for the community and kept the doors open, even through failing economies in 2008, 2009, and tough, Mac said to me when close to the end of the Tulas, he goes, when I come back in the next life, I'm going to be a city planner. I thought, okay, that's
That'll get them.
you zone it. So,
Well, I want to go back because you did mention I've known you for years, and you have talked about this in the past, but I forgot. Can you talk a little bit about? I had Max Holmberg on here a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about his experiences at Berkeley. But who was on the faculty at the time when you were there studying?
Jerry Bergonzi, there was a ton of great players.
Max mentioned Joanne Brackeen. Was she there at the time too, or no?
She might have been. I was working, and my student job was with a guy named Greg Bottolato, who was an amazing saxophone player. Also, I took piano lessons from Laszlo Gardoni, who's a fantastic Hungarian piano player, and so there was some cats there, and I mean, not only at that school, but just in Boston in general, there was some serious musicians.
What about? I'm curious. Some of your classmates at the time at Berkeley. Do you remember anyone who's gone on to?
Man,
be
I
players?
tell you, I went to a senior recital, and it happened to be Jeff Harper, Mark Fendel, and gosh, I want to say it was the guitar player Dan Heck, who all came out here.
Basically, Bebop and Destruction.
Bebop and Destruction. They came out here, and then so like when I got into the Seattle scene, I was like, hey, here's these cats that I met in Boston who weren't all necessarily from here. Mark was from Portland area, I believe, and I think Dan moved. So it was great to connect with them again and just have that common Berkeley experience together, And so when the 200 trio came out here, Max, Greg, and Cole, it was like seeing the next wave of Berkeley cats, come by, and so we gave them the little nickname, the Berkeley Boys, with a Z,
Good.
Berkeley Boys,
You
yeah.
got to keep with the times, right? All right, awesome. Well, let's see. What did I want to ask you? So let's see. Oh, yeah. You said prior to high school. Well, I'm curious. Prior to going to Berkeley, because Seattle's had, still has many great piano players that are from here that have stuck around here their whole lives. Are there
Right.
any piano players that you studied with, like jazz pianists that are around the Seattle area prior to going to Berkeley?
I I tried getting a hold of Mark Seals a number of times, and he never really seemed to return my calls. So I as much as I wanted to study with him, that didn't happen. But I was fortunate enough to study with Jerome Gray.
I was going to ask you, but okay,
Yeah.
yeah, go on. Please talk about Jerome, because a lot of people don't know who this is, but if you could talk a little bit about him, that would be awesome.
Well, Jerome's kind of like the Yoda of jazz piano, in the fact that, he kind of was a hermit of sorts. He had stopped playing on the scene a number of years ago, but he was probably the most gifted piano player in the Northwest, for sure. I mean, he was a guy who was so sharp that he taught himself Mandarin in like a number of months. He could play, giant steps in one hand and have You Met Miss Jones in the other hand with complete accuracy. He's just kind of one of those guys that, and he just the way that he taught was both intimidating, but it gave you a sense of like an idea, of mastery and what it would take to kind of get to that sort of level. I have a feeling, that Jerome had kind of a bit of a chip on his shoulder because he came from a family of classical trained musicians, and to them, a career in jazz was just not good. I mean, it was, why would you want to do that,
I think that sentiment can be shared by many parents these days too. But
Right.
But go on.
Right. Well, I think it stems from that elitism that only certain European music is good, and that other ethnic music is bad or lesser or more, and I think it's really, quite honestly, I think it's a racial and a racist construct, I think it has to do a lot with, trying to downplay the cultures of blacks and Latin and people that aren't white, and to be honest, like I come from a biracial family. My mom was from Costa Rica, and very proud of my Latino heritage, but wasn't aware of the sort of slight ways that she was being discriminated against, like when it came to getting a bank loan or something like that. Even though they had perfect credit, she would be referred to the subprime unit, just because of her accent and the way that she spoke. So, just seeing different ways where there is, systematic racism and this whole idea that European music of that ilk is far superior and far better and classier than, other art and other music. European art is fine art. Anything else is folk art.
Right.
Oh, that's nice. And that sort of thinking starts to cut away at
Anybody.
yeah. I mean, I loved playing classical music, but I remember playing a song, a Beethoven sonata, and my teacher, Pat, goes, "No, that's not the right note." And I go, "Well, that note sounded pretty good." I like, maybe Beethoven would have wanted that note,
Yeah.
And I remember her going, if Beethoven would have wanted that note, he would have written that note.
I wasn't around at the time, but from talking with people, from what I understand, like those guys, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, those guys were geniuses, and they would improvise and change their themes around all the time. There was just one point in time where someone wrote down a version which became the definitive version. It's like, well, we have to play it this way every single time now.
Right. Well, I mean, music is in essence like a photograph. It is one rendition of something that had been workshopped and toyed around with, and just like when you look at a lead sheet or whatnot of our a standard or whatnot, it's like, okay, well, this is the direction, this is the first mold of this tune, but you listen to 20 different renditions and they're all different, and I didn't want to be constrained in the box of classical thinking. I think that there was more freedom and more expressiveness in jazz music and in music where I could improvise and be creative and all of those great composers, they were masters at improvising. I mean, there's stories of Bach going to the next village and sitting in on the organ and across from the other organist, and he'd play a theme, and the other organist would play a theme, and then he'd play another theme and modulate, and then also counterpoint, and then they'd be jamming back and forth.
The loser had to drink a cup of mead or something like that. Or
Bach liked to have a little drink at the end of the day, so yeah, he definitely wasn't a teetotaler.
Right on. Well, we're not that it's important, but I would like to, because I didn't even think about this. But since you did study with Jerome, I'd like to know a little bit. So he came from a very kind of rigid family, set in their ways of music, and so he rebelled against that. You weren't there when he was a kid, but maybe he.
And from what I've gathered from the story is that he decided to play jazz music, and his family just basically didn't accept that, and specifically his father.
So how long did you study with him?
Off and on for 3 or 4 years. I'd take a bunch of classes, and then it would be so much information that I'd have to go process it and work on it. And then I'd come and take a couple more classes, and so off and on for 3 or 4 years. I feel like it was kind of a music finishing school, postgraduate degree, kind of like, okay.
So this was after Berkeley or prior to Berkeley?
This was after.
Okay, I see.
This was all after.
So during high school, I'm assuming you probably got down into the city to see some jazz and watch some groups and sit in. So can you maybe talk about, I know there's a Hadley Calaman connection too, so we'll talk about that later. I love this story. But can you talk about some of the clubs that were around on the scene when you were, middle school, high school, that you used to go check out, and musicians maybe you like to go see and watch?
I remember catching Mark Murphy singing at the New Orleans Cafe or restaurant, and hearing him do his rendition of the Oliver Stone song, Stolen Moments, and going up to him afterwards and saying, I love that song. That's one of my favorite songs that you do. And, I'm only 15, 16 years old, but it was awesome to hear that. And also, going to Jazz Alley. Of course, Jazz Alley was just half the size it is now, but it was still in that same location. We'd be talking like, 1990, 91, 92. But yeah, just occasionally I would be able to come down and see shows like that. A lot of music I saw at jazz festivals, and when you go with the school to go see this or that, everybody hop in the bus. We're gonna go do a jazz, a jazz competition or whatever. Jazz competition.
We'll get to that too. For those of you who don't, we've talked about this before, but the Owl Thistle is well known for the scat competition. We talked about this with Jose a little bit, and maybe if we have time tonight, maybe we can regale the viewers on the concert with some scatting. We'll see.
Well, I don't think that I definitely did not start the scat competition.
You were there for a lot of bloody nights. Let's be honest.
That was definitely something that Mark Fendel started, and Jeff Harper and those guys, as part of the tradition of that was pretty much the part in the night where everybody would get up and this is, you got to remember, this is like 1:15, 1:30 in the evening, and everybody had their share of whatever
adult cocktails, adult beverages,
adult cigarettes, whatever they were into. The scat competition was, I think, a way for instrumentalists to kind of get up there and try something that they normally never get a chance to do. Instrumentalists are told, play your instrument, but this was like a kind of an all skate kind of like, all right, let's have some fun. And some would do it in a silly way, and of course, you would get extra points if you did it in a silly way. But I think specifically it was also a chance to get the bartender and who was the son of the owner, Colin Geary, rest in peace, to get out from behind the bar and share some of his silky smooth scatting abilities. And I think for him it was definitely the highlight. And inevitably, I think Colin won a majority of the scat competitions.
He was also pouring the drinks too, though, so there's points there as well.
Well, it's important to know what side of the toast your butter is on.
That's right.
All right. Well, I'm curious, going back to, again, high school, maybe pre-college, were there any clubs where you could go sit in and play? Any sessions that were around back in the day?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, and I know you kind of know the story a little bit, but the Earshot was having a Monday night session at the at Jazz Alley. And I remember being a 15, 16-year-old kid and going and talking my parents into taking me to Jazz Alley. By the way, I just remembered Ray Brown Trio, seeing the Ray Brown Trio at Jazz Alley when I was of that age.
What was who was playing with him at the time?
It was Benny Green and Jeff Hamilton.
So slouches.
Yeah. Yeah, those guys can really play. Yeah, heroes of mine for sure. But I also got to see Gene Harris there, McCoy Tyner, Chick Corea. I mean, that's been a great venue for seeing all of my heroes, which aren't all piano players, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was a Monday night jam session, and Earshot was just trying it out and trying to get kind of a local presence in on an off night. And so I went down to it, and I knew 3 songs at the time. I knew blues in G and B flat. I could play both in G and B flat. And then I also knew Green Dolphin Street, and I can't remember what the other song. Maybe it was Satin Doll. So I went up and Hadley Kalaman was there. He was running that session.
Who else was in the band, just out of curiosity?
Phil Sparks was on bass, and I can't remember who was on drums. But I, nervous as heck. First jam session ever with professional musicians. I had jammed before in Snohomish, but it was like with a country band. And, they were like, "Man, you play real good, I was like, "Yeah, G and C, and then occasionally D, It's like, how'd you know that the song was going to do that? Well, I took a lucky guess, But this was a whole different experience, and, get up there, and I called Green Dolphin Street, because at 15, you don't have a whole lot of songs memorized. And so Hadley goes, okay, Green Dolphin Street, and he starts it off in E flat. Now, I had learned it out of a fake book in C.
Which this is actually common. A lot of musicians do this. In fact, including myself, I learned it in C first, but a lot of the recordings, the professional recordings, are in E flat. But you don't know that until you get your butt kicked in a session, which all of us do at one point or another.
Well, this was my first butt kicking, and it left a mark, because not only did Hadley play it in E flat, but he decided to take it at a tempo that was, for me at the time, inhumane. For him, it was just fine. And I'm sure there was a certain amount of, okay, kid, you want to be up on the stage, you're going to have to cut this tempo, and let me tell you, it took me about 6 or 7 courses before I even figured out what key I was in. Maybe not 6 or 7 courses, but I figured out the tune in E flat. And then, it was one of many situations in which I learned something by getting burned, and jam sessions are so good for that. I remember when I lived down in Portland, a weekly Monday night session at Produce Row, hosted by Ron Steen. I was a 19-year-old kid. I'd go in there with my fake ID. And
Whatever do you mean?
I mean, yeah. So anyway, I would go in and you know, the band leaders would call a tune, or whoever the saxophone players would call a tune. You and the Night and the Music. Okay, I don't know that song, but I'm the piano player up here, so it'd be a process of, you know, asking the bass player, hey, you know, well, how's this song go? You know, it starts in C minor and then does a little thing, and the bridge goes to A flat, and you get little clues, and you might stumble your way through it, or you might not, you know. But every time that certain chord came around, you're like, no, oh no, that's not it. Oh, no, maybe, you know. But you had to kind of discover how these standards went. And of course, I'd go home, I'd practice it, I'd get it all ready, and then you know, the next week it'd be, you know, Secret Love, and you're like, oh, okay, I don't know that song, you know. And so you just got your butt kicked every week, and you came back, and that's how you learn tunes.
Well, I'm curious. A couple questions. One, after the debacle at Jazz Alley with Hadley and Phil, how were the band members? Were they sympathetic? Were they like any words of wisdom, or just like get out of here? How did that go
Well,
down?
it all happened so quickly. It was kind of like the scene with Santa and the Christmas story, you know, where he's ho, 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 and then the boot, and he's going down the slide. That's very similar. That kind of like was my experience, but with Hadley in the boot, you know. Funny thing, later I got to play with Hadley and record with Hadley, and we had a great album together with Tom Marriott and Phil, and you know, it got to the #2 spot in the radio plays all over the country, called Straight Ahead. And I was able to play on the first Sundays of the month, the Jazz Offering, with Hadley and Phil Sparks and Jamel Nance and you know, Reggie Goins for a number of years, 5, 6, 7 years, and that was a great experience as well. So it all came full circle, you know, like, you know, you get the boot, and then, you know, you go home and you work on stuff, and then you come back and hopefully you get it right.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you. I mean, because you're older than me by how old are you?
I think I'm 2 years older than you.
Okay.
So you're 42?
42.
Yeah. When's your birthday?
August 8th.
Okay. Mine's May 24th, and I'm 44.
So, okay. I remember growing up, and in high school, that's when the internet came in, and we didn't have, you know, iReal Pro. We didn't have all the electronic stuff that they had now.
Oh gosh.
So I mean, for you to be going and learning tunes, was this a lot of it by? Did you have fake books? Were you using strictly recordings? I mean, how were you learning a lot of this information when you wanted to learn new tunes that you didn't know?
I think it was a combination of, you know, definitely I had that illegal fake book from Berkeley that had all the wrong chord changes in it.
Which is now the new real book. Or no,
Yeah.
the real book. The real book. Then there's the new real book.
Right.
Yeah.
We didn't have any of the Chuck Schur books out that are out now that have great changes and, you know, publishing, and they have the copyright. So I learned tunes, you know, from reading out of that book, and then also just kind of, you know, as your music library starts to increase, you know, your awareness of songs. You know, my first jazz recordings might have been like Kinda Blue and Chick Corea Acoustic Band, you know, which had a great version of Spain, which was a remake of his old version in the 70s. So I learned that version first, and then when I went to go play it with other people, they were like, no, it goes like, oh, okay, all right.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you too. From the beginnings of your love of jazz and other styles of music, who were some of the pianists that you kind of gravitated towards first? Who were some of your first, like, really grabbed you?
Well, I tell you, you know, Gene Harris and that recording with the Ray Brown Trio, of Little Darling. I remember hearing that, and I was probably about 14 or 13 years old, and just hearing the dynamic range and how much soul was in that. I really gravitated towards that because it was just so swinging and so powerful. And I think I went from Gene Harris and then quickly discovered Oscar Peterson and the Oscar Peterson trio, and that was just like, whoa. So like Count Basie, Gene Harris, Oscar Peterson, but then I was getting into like Chick Corea and listening to, Wynton Kelly play on Miles, with Miles, and so it was just all of that stuff was kind of getting thrown into the pot and stirring around, and listening to Art Blakey and the Messengers play, so just all of those rhythms and all of the different influences, it was great. It was so, growing up, one of the toughest things for me musically was rhythm. And to then, like, listen to this music which is so ingrained in rhythm, I think it really helped. It helped me to understand, like, oh, okay, I get this. And then I think my Latino heritage started to kick in and go, yeah, this is part of your DNA. Like, this is all coming full circle here, So.
Well, I wanted to ask about that because, there's some musicians that are like, okay, they're straight ahead jazz piano players, or they do like Dixieland jazz, or maybe they do like more fusion, or they're funk or blues, but like, you're one of those musicians, and there are several in Seattle that can play anything very, very well.
Oh,
like if it's
you.
Brazilian music, Cuban music, R&B, gospel, whatever. I've heard you do it all, and it always sounds amazing. And that's why you work, I think, with so many different, diverse musicians.
Well, thank you.
So, did you have to? I mean, of course, I know you. Of course, you had to study this stuff. But growing up, did you hear a lot of the other stuff, like Latin music that you heard and like learned by osmosis, or did you have to go in and really study that stuff, all the different parts and how to play those?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like I just grew up listening to everything, I mean, with the exclusion of like death metal and stuff like that, but like I didn't like the really aggressive, like, punk and heavily distorted music, but other than that, I was listening to everything from, pop to, to jazz, to classical, to rap, to, I mean, all that stuff. And it was all, so like it's just like cooking. It's like, okay, if you want to make this, you have to put these things together, to make that. And if you want to make this, then it's some of the same things that you used to make that, but there's a little twist, maybe a different ingredient. And so the more I learned about music, the more I learned that when you're playing a certain style or whatnot, you want to ask yourself, what does the music need me to do? Rather than say, I'm going to do this to the music. Right. I just ask myself, well, I'm playing a song from 1930. What would it sound like if I was in 1930 and playing the song, Or I'm playing a Stevie Wonder song. What does Stevie Wonder sound like? Well, he sounds like this, And I just recall, and I don't make Stevie Wonder sound like the 1930s, and I don't make the 1930s sound like Stevie Wonder,
But you could if you wanted to.
You could if you want to. Yeah, that's some fun too. And in studying different music from other countries and other cultures, it's been fascinating. It's basically just expanding what you know about the different nuances of music. I like to say it's like rice, because I grew up learning how to make what my mom would call Costa Rican rice, which is onions and garlic, olive oil. You saute all that, and then you saute the rice. And in another pot, you have chicken broth, and you brown the rice first in the cast iron pot, and then when everything is the broth is to a boil, the rice is browning, and it's everything's happening. It's all hot. It's all ready to do. Then you pour the broth in it. It creates this huge atomic cloud in your kitchen and makes a fantastic sound. And then you cover it and put it down to simmer for 20 minutes. It's like, so I was talking to Cliff Colon, and his heritage is Puerto Rican.
I've had his rice. He makes great rice.
He makes great rice, right? And we were talking rice. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I learned how to make Costa Rican rice, and you learned how to make Puerto Rican rice. What's the difference? And he described his process, and I go, that's a lot like Costa Rican rice. Yeah. But there was a couple little differences, And I feel like that's like music. It's like we're both making rice, but the way you make it over here is slightly different. Now, I married a Japanese woman, an American Japanese woman, and in their culture, they make sticky rice, and it's white, and there's no onions and garlic or any of that stuff. And so, it's, for me, it's like, ugh, that rice has no flavor. You have to eat it with something else, and but the point is, you're using the same ingredients all over the world. You're using rice, you're using beans, you're using onions and garlic and lentils and whatnot. But in each place, they spice it a little differently. They prepare it a little differently. And it's in those subtle nuances that you get what the essence of that is. So, to play gospel music, I got asked to, Tim Kennedy actually referred me over to go play at a African Methodist Episcopal church. And I'm not African, and I'm not Methodist, and I'm not Episcopal, but I went and did that. And that, by the way, was Elna Jordan's church. Her mom played there for 56 years and had started to develop arthritis in her hands, and so wasn't able to play all the services. So here I am sitting down with Elna Jordan's mother and saying, well, how would you play this particular hymn? And watching how she was voicing the chords and hearing and experiencing how, because I didn't want to screw it up. Yeah. They had listened to her play for 56 years. I don't want to be the guy who messes up, how great thou art, because I play it squarely or, So I wanted to play it like she played it, And so in those experiences, I tried to be as authentic to the music as possible, and not try to, just because I know how to do 2-5-1s and throw them in there if I could, that's not what it needs. Yeah. What it needs is the tradition of what this is, and it's all very subtle differences, It's like going from C to E7, right? Well, that's a cool thing to do, right? Because you got the G is going up a half step to G sharp, and you're keeping similar notes from the C chord to the E chord. But if you were in a gospel church, you would go C, and instead of going up to E7, you would go E7 over B, the fifth of it. And that creates this expanding motion of the G going up a half step and the C going down a half step. Yeah. And all of a sudden, we have a whole different thing. Now, if you were to say to the regular jazz musician, explain this harmony, they might go, well, I would go C, B minor 7/2, diminished, E7, and then A minor. Yeah. It's like, okay, yes, that's what jazz harmony is of a certain ilk. But if you were to do that in a the AME church, they would go, maybe not. You know, it's like we want that E7 chord over the B. That's the sound. You know, so anyway, just little subtle things like that.
No, that's all awesome stuff. Speaking of arranging, I wanted to ask you because I did not know this. So you played in Dave Bardoon's band, Genesis.
Yeah.
Did you get the opportunity, because I know he's a brilliant writer and arranger, did you get the chance to work on any of that kind of stuff with him, or just kind of learn by playing his music? Or
Well, you know, I grew up playing Bardoon's charts in band and also in jazz choir. And so when I got a chance to, you know, when he offered me a scholarship to go to Mount Hood, I was like thrilled to be working with him, and he's a great piano player, you know, and we didn't work so much on arrangements, but he would give me really great voicings to use, and like just expanding my horizons harmonically, you know. He just had all these tricks of the trade that I hadn't learned yet. Yeah, so.
And so when you were down in Oregon, where all did you live down there?
I lived in Portland I lived in Gresham, Oregon for a year, and then I moved up to Mount Hood, and I lived up on Mount Hood about 20 minutes from Ski Bowl. Yeah, so it was about a 40-minute commute to get down into town, but my buddy Nate Dogg, it was the 90s. Everybody had a dog on the
not the Nate Dogg, whatever.
No,
yeah.
not Warren G and Nate Dogg, but this is the Oregon equivalent of Nate Dogg's. My nickname was V Dog. He was Nate Dogg. We had a friend Lou Dog. You get where we're going.
Many dogs. Did you play poker? No, I'm sorry. Okay, go on with your story.
So he had a place to live, and I had a car. So between the two of us, we made it down to college, and I had an old '84 Buick, and the thing was a gas guzzler, and so there was times where we'd run out of gas, you know, getting up and down. There's not that many gas stations on what was it, I-84 or what's? Anyway, I can't remember the highway. But there was a place in Sandy, which is about 20 minutes out of Gresham, called, what is it called? Gosh darn it. Calamity Jane's. And their thing was they had like 30 different kinds of burgers, right? And so I went in there one day, and I noticed there was a piano in the middle of the room, an old kind of upright piano. And I asked the waiter if I could, you know, play the piano while I was waiting for my burger. And he said, sure. So I started playing, and the owner comes up and was like, oh, man, you sound great, you know. And he put a tip jar out on top of the piano with a $5 bill in it. And I think I made, you know, people started, you know, throwing money in, and I started, you know, playing some different songs. And I think I made like $45 in tips. And I was like, great, the gas money. So whenever I needed gas money, I just pop in to Calamity Jane's and work for an hour, and they give me, you know, a burger and, you know, walk out with $45, $50 in tips.
Right. Awesome. Well, I have not been keeping an eye on the time. Usually, like, we've got about 5 minutes left, and normally about 15 minutes in the end, I open things up for questions. So if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask Eric or myself, please feel free to text them in. And if we can't get to them before the interview concludes, we can do it after the fact in the comment section. So are there any questions at this time? Have anybody? Okay, cool. All right. Well, so we still have some time here. So when you were in Portland, who were some of the musicians around on the scene at that time when you were down there hanging out and playing?
Oh, man, I used to go see Nancy King and Steve Christofferson play. And Nancy's a fantastic vocalist. She's a beautiful artist, and really just an amazing talent. And her and Steve had this great chemistry together, and it was just magic to see them play. But yeah, John Gross, great player. Of course, Ron Steen had a number of jam sessions that I would go to.
Was Mel Brown around at the time too?
Mel
or-
Brown was around, of course. Yeah. I would go check him out too, and yeah, Portland has a fantastic music scene. So,
They seem to have. I don't live in Portland. I've been down there to play a bunch, but they seem to have a lot of club turnover, like every place else. It seems like a lot of the clubs
well,
come
yeah,
and go. you
yeah.
know.
I know Jimmy Max just closed down this past couple of years. I remember, guys like Dan Vollmer and who's still a friend today. In fact, a roommate when we go over to play at do the Centrum Jazz Camp. We've been roommates for six years at the Centrum Jazz Camp. So yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, that's a whole. We don't have enough time. There's so many more things I want to ask you, but so, anyways, have any questions come in? Okay, so like I said, if I apologize for not keeping an eye on the time. If you do have questions, or if you're watching this after the fact and you want to have them answered, feel free to put them in the comment section, and we can get to them after the fact. But we're going to actually start wrapping up here. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Eric, for joining us.
Kareem.
And it's been a pleasure. And I tell all my guests this, but we always run out of time, so we'll have to do this again. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you in regards to recording or performances or lessons, how can they do that?
Well, they can go to my website, www.ericverlinde.com, and that's EricVerlinde.com. And there's a contact page there. You can get a hold of me that way.
Cool. Perfect. All right, so we're going to take a very short break, reconfigure the room, and we're actually going to have Eric playing on this beautiful grand piano right behind us here. And so we'll be starting things off at 6 o'clock, so stick around. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kareem.